Hello and welcome to my Symposium 2021 presentation. My name is Jackson Jacobs. I'm currently working in the Masters of Arts in Teaching program at Randolph College. And I'd like to talk to you guys about the research that I've been conducting over the course of the year. I call it I'll Make Time, Special Education Teachers' Priorities versus Responsibilities. So I came into Lynchburg and Randolph and special education at the beginning of this year, and it was all new to me. I mean, I had been teaching before, but not in this particular department, not in this part of the country, not while also being a student myself at the same time. And so I walked around the department trying to figure out up from down how to do the very basic things, having to ask questions all the time. And if you ask a special education teacher how to do the same paperwork 10 times, you're going to get 10 different answers. And usually it'll start with, well, I wish that I did it this way, or, well, last year we did it another way. And that's normal, but in a very legally rigid and binding field like special education, it can be somewhat problematic. And so I noticed this difference between how teachers wish they were spending their time and their responsibilities, the attitudes and feelings that they brought into the classroom, and how they are actually spending their time, the priorities, or the work assignments that ultimately end up getting done over the course of an average work week. And so I wanted to conduct research to investigate where exactly this difference lay. So I started reading literature. There's plenty to be had on the topic. And I found two studies that really stuck out to me. The first was Matucci and company from 2017. They conducted a study called Teachers' Responsibility for Educational Outcomes and its Association with Teachers' Instructional Approaches. And this was a qualitative study where they asked teachers about their philosophies and their sense of responsibilities, and also determined based on certain quantitative variables their overall success. And they found a great correlation between the personal responsibility that teacher self-reports and the overall success they have in a variety of areas, be that building rapport, academic success with students, less burnout and greater job satisfaction, etc. The second study that really stuck out to me was from Charles Mayer in 1982. This was from early on in special education as its own field. It's called Time Management Training for Providers of Special Education Services. And in this study, special education teachers were given the opportunity for time management training, and those that self-reported an interest and an optimism in the usefulness of this training ultimately saw results and improvement in their workload afterwards as a result. Whereas those that were indifferent or felt negatively about the training saw little to no difference. And so there was this interesting self-fulfilling prophecy being had in the usefulness of the training and ultimately in personal responsibility. Well, that's great, but it doesn't tell me exactly the difference between the source of responsibility versus priorities. So I set to work, I composed a questionnaire that I issued to 5 volunteer high school special education teachers from urban schools in Central Virginia. The data was collected over the course of the week, and they were given about 5 questions that they were asked to answer with as great detail as possible. And so these are the 5 questions. What do you feel is your greatest responsibility as a special education teacher? What work task do you spend the most time working on in a week? Do you feel the tasks you spend the most time working on match the expectations of others? Why or why not? If you could have more time on one particular work task, what would it be? And if you could spend less time on one particular work task in your job, what would it be? And so I issued out the surveys, I got back my results, and I went to work on thematic analysis of my data. Thematic analysis is a process of drawing conclusions based off of finding patterns and relationships within qualitative data, in this case, written responses. So we code for patterns in the data. These are recurring leitmotifs. And then we organize those codes into broader themes that we can start to draw conclusions from. And so there were codes in my data for objects like time, relationships, stress, paperwork, teachers and parents, administrators, responsibilities and priorities, and so on. But the greater themes that these all started to point to were more specific. And so I found three very important themes that I wanted to concentrate on. Those were a desire for a streamlined workload, a concentration on student interaction, and too much time spent on paperwork, too little time spent teaching. So this is an example of some of the submissions that I had for my questionnaire. I'll read: in the past few years, my teaching role has diminished, but my responsibilities for case management have increased significantly. And I've color coded this to identify different patterns or codes in the data. Yellow here, it identifies with time. Blue identifies with student relationships. Red identifies with stress. And green identifies with case management or paperwork. And these same patterns are mostly identical in the answer of another participant to a different question. It is mentally draining having to ensure everything is up to date / not focusing on the kids. So based off of these results and the similarity with many of the responses that I received, I did eventually conclude that there was a source of difference between the responsibilities and feelings that a teacher brings into the classroom versus the items that are prioritized over the course of a special education teacher's workday or work week. And so there were several limitations to this particular study that I would certainly hope to expand upon with future research. Admittedly, there are very few quantitative variables that I think certainly would play a big part in identifying how exactly a teacher, a special education teacher, is spending their time over a given day, for example. There's also the possibility for a much broader matrix of different perspectives to be put into play here. For example, the perspectives of the responsibilities of a teacher from the point of view of a student, from the point of view of a parent, from the point of view of another teacher in a different department or from a different state, and so on. But ultimately, I think that this research was useful as a good next step for expanding the discussion on not only teachers' priorities and responsibilities, but what exactly the role of a teacher is. And so based off of this research, we can see that increasingly in special education, the work of a teacher is not necessarily just that of working with students and teaching, but also providing the legal infrastructure necessary to facilitate that education, which most of the time is done in the background and is done privately through case management and workload, for better or for worse. Regardless, I'm hoping that this data will expand in the future and that the discussion will continue into a much brighter future. Thank you. Have a good one.